Speaker.
Dr. David Clark.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there was one thing that member got right. In his speech, I spotted it. He said that this bill relates to the budget. For anyone at home looking for a factoid in that speech, he suggested that this bill relates to the budget, and I can't fault him on that. It may not be exactly about the budget, but it does relate to the budget. The member is quite right technically. I look across the House to catch his eye, but I can't catch it anymore. He must be hiding under his desk, Mr. Speaker, and I might be doing the same thing in his position. Mr. Speaker, in this bill, we do have, in the Imprest supply bill, we have some money set aside for capital injections, which is a standard thing that governments do. And the bills that and so I wish to talk about some of those. I also wish to talk about the mental health spending that is related in the supplementary estimates, and also about the alterations in revenue relating to KiwiSaver, all of which are related to the government's attempt to get into surplus. And as my colleague noted in his contribution, Grant Robertson, not yet the Honourable Grant Robertson, but he noted that this desperate attempt to get to surplus, that the failure again for the 7th time in a row for this government to get to surplus, was in fact the central plank of their election campaign. It was their #1 promise, as my colleague the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove points out, in the last election campaign, and therefore this issue cuts to the heart of their credibility as a government. And they failed to get there despite making a number of changes. And in fact, if we look closely at the changes to KiwiSaver, the amount saved in the first year is roughly what brings their projections into line to finally achieve surplus in the next round. We'll see whether that really happens, because they don't have a plan for the economy. That is what is clear in these estimates, in these supplementary estimates. They are jiggering things around. They are trying to make things fit together with a tactical plan without any kind of strategy over the top of it other than to get re-elected. That is what we've seen in this budget of broken promises that they brought to the electorate. We've seen, of course, the promises broken around the number of jobs created. They've pushed that promise out by 3 years in the budget. We've seen the wage rises get pushed out by 3 years in the budget. The $7,000 they said every New Zealander would be better off. They'd promised that previously by the end of next year. Well, they've pushed that out another 3 years. And this is becoming a pattern. It's always jammed tomorrow with this government, unless, of course, it's a television screen for a government department, in which case $140,000 is no problem at all. That's chump change when it comes to this government. They've got their eye off the ball. They're out of ideas, and so we see in these documents, we see the moving around of small bits of expenditure here and there. But the really big thing in this budget, and the big broken promise, is the KiwiSaver changes. It does, however, fit a pattern. It is the 8th change this government has made to KiwiSaver. They've never liked savings. Although New Zealand has an acknowledged problem with capital debt. Businesses struggle to get the money and capital they need to get off the ground, as compared to in Australia, where they've had much more proactive savings policies. Of course, Labor introduced them in the 70s, and Muldoon, with his propensity for debt, similar to this government, got rid of it. Would have been many hundreds of billions of dollars in savings in this country were it not for that Muldoonian movement back to cancel that savings regime. Australia, noting by the by, have $1.3 trillion in their retirement savings as a result of adopting a similar scheme after us. But this government is the government of record debt, more debt than Muldoon. And in their attempt to get to this wafer-thin surplus that they failed for the 7th time to get to, they cut KiwiSaver again. The first cut they made, if members cast their mind back, was to reduce the member contribution rate from 4% to 2% in 2008.
Order. The member's not been quite as blatant as the member preceding him, but I am going to attempt to get him to talk to either the supplementary estimates or the Imprest supply. The member might be getting to it, but it'd be good if he got to it properly.
Mr. Speaker, I will leap ahead and point to page 25 of the supplementary estimates bill, where the KiwiSaver changes in this supplementary estimates are recorded, because that is where I'm coming to. I'm wishing to point out that there's a pattern to this changing behaviour, this whittling away of KiwiSaver. The changes noted in the budget, and if any member wishes to correct me, I'd be interested, relate to the government's refusal to allow new members to sign up with any notice period. In the budget, they cut it off on budget day. They cut off the $1,000 Kickstarter contribution, and that's why we've had an alteration to the Kickstarter payments recorded in the supplementary estimates. And as I said, that does fit the pattern of this government, which reduced the member contribution rate from 4% to 2%, then reduced the member fee subsidy of $40 per annum. It discontinued that completely. Then it got rid of, capped compulsory employer contributions at 2%. Then it discontinued the employer tax credit. Then it halved the maximum member tax credit to just $521 a year. Employer contributions were subject to an additional tax under this government. Then minimum employee rate was reversed. They got back out of they reduced it from 4% to 2%. They put it back up to 3%. They don't quite know where they are on this particular thing. And then in this estimates document, we see that they removed the Kickstarter payment, and that has had an effect on this budget. They have removed that first $1,000 that incentivised kids to start saving, that incentivised first-time workers to start saving. They've removed that, and with it, the incentive for people to save, despite the acknowledged savings challenge that New Zealand faces. And it really is short-sighted. It is indicative of a government without a plan. It's indicative of a government that is willing to break promises at the drop of a hat. And I bet just about every member over on that other side had that $1,000 payment before they stopped the scheme, before they stopped future generations. In fact, before they stopped 500,000 New Zealanders in the next 4 years receiving that $1,000 KiwiSaver kickstart. It is a tragedy. It is a sad, sad day that the government broke that promise to future New Zealanders' earnings. This government also broke the promise around the surplus. We've noted that. They broke the promise in terms of not introducing new taxes in this budget. We had 3 new taxes: a tax of capital gains on property investors. We had an airport tax that was introduced, and a broadband tax. The government's own department said that these were taxes, while the minister stood up and tried to deny it. This is a government in disarray. They snatched at a grab bag of window dressing opportunities, the housing agenda that's falling apart at the seams as we see Nick Smith's debacle, fiasco. The superlatives fail us as Aucklanders struggle to find affordable homes. The government's saying they'll be affordable to someone. They'll be affordable to someone. Mr. Speaker, but most hard-working Kiwis in Auckland, certainly on the younger generation, can no longer see themselves owning a home, and that is because this government has sat on its hands for 7 years, delivering seven failures to get to surplus, running for 2 elections on the promise of surplus, breaking promises left, right and centre without a vision, failing to reach its own export target of lifting exports as a percentage of GDP to 40%. It's a government out of ideas that is failing New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, I am running out of time, so I won't be able to mention in too much detail the changes to mental health funding, but I will note that the mental health cuts in Dunedin that are being faced by NGO providers are going to result in a reduction in the volume of services. That's what the providers say. This budget is cutting health services, it's cutting future savings, it's window dressing to do a little bit for really hard up people. Good on them for taking some steps to alleviate the suffering of some of the most hard up beneficiaries, although it only goes a small way towards the damage they did in the 90s to that very same group of people.